What's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of the Better Fantasy Football Show. I'm your host, Will, joined today by Joe from Instagram handle at fantasy.football.analyst. Easily one of our favorite accounts to follow on the gram. Joe, so pumped to have you on, man. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about these rookie quarterbacks.
Yep. So going to be a shorter episode today, so we'll just kind of jump right into it. Not a lot of quarterbacks to talk through, generally when it comes to our dynasty drafts, but a pretty good class this year, especially compared to last year. So what we're going to be doing today with Joe is going through our tiered rankings, but first I want to learn a little bit, Joe, about your evaluation process for how you look at rookie quarterbacks, specifically in the context of dynasty. We could talk about superflex, we could talk about 1 QB leagues. It's up to you.
Yeah, so when it comes to rookie quarterbacks, there's a couple different aspects that we want to look at. One being their longevity in the league, especially if you're thinking dynasty. You know, you're going to have these guys in your roster for 10, 15 years. If you drafted Pat Mahomes all that time ago, you know, he signed that 10-year contract. You're sitting pretty. You got a QB1. You don't have to worry about the position for another 10 years. So we look at guys like Anthony Richardson. Kind of reminds me more of the Lamar trajectory, the Josh Allen trajectory. Both those guys still doing well. But for the most part, I mean, those are guys that are going to use their legs a lot more. When their legs stop being effective, are their arms going to be good enough? There's a lot of unknowns with Anthony Richardson. But that's just one type of player. Then you got guys like Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, pocket passers. You know, we've seen Young do a little more than that. But for the most part, those are guys who you can kind of just say, like, all right, they're going to sit in the pocket, see how they perform year one and year two. But when I'm looking at the draft and I'm looking at these players, obviously you want the upside. So guys who can run the ball, that's a huge plus. Guys who maybe fall into positions where they're not going to be the starter right away. Like if you drafted Jordan Love all those years ago, he's just kind of been melting on your bench for like 5 years. And that's also what you want to try to avoid, depending on where you're at with your team. If you're a competitor, if you're a contender, and you need to win now, you want to go for guys that are going to start year one. And if you maybe, again, you have a guy like Pat Mahomes, you have a guy like Josh Allen, maybe Aaron Rodgers, you've been riding that out. You say, hey, Aaron Rodgers is going to be out. Let me get a guy who's going to sit for a year or two, and then he could be a stud when he comes in. So it really just depends on your team about how I approach my draft. But generally, rule of thumb for quarterbacks, you want guys who can run the ball.
That's totally, yeah. We've seen those guys break fantasy over the past couple of years, especially now with Justin Fields. Dude, from weeks like 1 to 6, he was such a dud last year. And then they finally figured out the Bears offense that he could run, and they got him scrambling, got him running, and then he was a beast for fantasy. So it's just crazy.
That's all it takes.
Yep. All right, so let's jump into it, dude. So these are your tiered rankings for rookie quarterbacks. And so I know in years past it's been a little bit shaky. This is a pretty good class, and it's interesting too. You mentioned the difference between the running quarterbacks and the sort of pocket passers. We got a good mix of both. So would love to start here in your fourth tier. I know it's some guys that might shake out in the NFL, might not, but still good names to know. So how are you viewing these guys in your fourth tier?
So in that fourth tier, we got the guys who, you know, once we talk about the main guys, the guys who were drafted the first couple rounds, you kind of look towards the end of this draft. You see guys like Jake Haener, Aiden O'Connell, Jaron Hall. These are the guys who I have in that fourth tier. There's obviously some other quarterbacks who were drafted late, and I'm just not even going to mention. But in this fourth tier, I mean, Aiden O'Connell, the only reason he might have some viability is with the situation with Jimmy and his contract and his failed physical. If he ends up not playing, Aiden O'Connell might be pushed into a position where he could start. Maybe it's a Gardner Minshew effect all over again. So there's that. Jake Haener, he's in a position in New Orleans where, you know, you got Jameis Winston, you got Derek Carr. Derek Carr just got booted by his last team. Jameis Winston, he may not be there at the start of the season. He could be traded. He could be whatever. So it's just kind of a position where Haener can kind of make his name as a backup and then be one of those guys where he fights for that starting role in a couple of years. Kind of thinking like Sam Howell. How Sam Howell last year was like, the Commanders are probably going to draft a quarterback. They're probably going to move on. They might go for a free agent, but he kind of just ended up being the starter. It just kind of worked out that way. So that's why I view Jake Haener. And then on top of that, Jaron Hall. He's someone I liked a lot in this draft. He fell a little farther than I would have liked to. Kind of a sleeper pick in this draft. He ended up with the Vikings. It seems like the Vikings have been trying to move on or not from Kirk Cousins the last 3 years. It's so weird because every year they're like, oh, the Vikings wanted to make a move for that quarterback. The Vikings are thinking about trading Kirk Cousins. And then they end up doing none of it and then just keep moving on. Like they drafted that quarter, I think he's on the Browns now, but they drafted a guy behind him who a lot of people thought might have been the next up after Cousins. I'm forgetting his name. Do you know his name? I think he was on the Browns
No,
now.
I'll find it. I'll find
It's
it.
escaping me. We'll find it.
Yeah. But so I love that list because there's guys here that you're not going to have to allocate any kind of draft capital to really. Later
Yeah.
round guys. Is there one in particular, Joe, that you think has a particularly high ceiling that could come out and because of maybe some physical talent or something like that come out and be like your league winner next year?
Ooh, tough to call any of these guys a league winner.
Yeah.
Because I think even if Aiden O'Connell does end up, I think he's got the highest percentage chance of getting some starts with the situation Jimmy Garoppolo. Not only his failed physical, but his injuries over the last couple of years. So I think O'Connell has the best chance to start, but even when he does, I don't think he's a league winner. I don't think he's a guy who you may even pick up. I mean, he's got Devonta Adams. That's always a plus. But Jaron Hall, I think if anything, if I'm going to bet on one of these guys in a starting position, I would bet Jaron Hall would be that guy that you might actually consider picking up out of this group. Hayner, he gets extra points for the photo shoot that we all saw, but still going to lean Jaron Hall if I'm going to pick one of these guys.
All right. I love it, dude. Thank you. And Kellen Mond is the name we're searching for, I think.
Kellen Mond, exactly. I
Yep.
remember when they
Okay,
drafted
cool.
him, and everybody's like, "Oh, he'll take over for Cousins," but
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
end up working out.
Yeah, like we have to be realistic about these guys at the back half of the drafts. Obviously, Tom Brady comes to mind, maybe a few others,
Yeah,
but look, with the NFL, everybody understands the importance of the QB position. So if you even sniff any sort of capacity to be a reliable NFL starter, you're going to shoot
yep,
up the draft board. Like, look at Malik Willis last year, like clear deficiencies as a passer, and they still took him fairly early in the draft because of the potential for him to be that franchise guy. And so, these guys probably won't pan out. Maybe we'll see him in the XFL in a couple years, but good names to know nonetheless, just in case.
the next Luis Perez.
For sure. All right, so that was tier 4. Tier 3, who do you got, Joe? I know we have a couple quarterbacks here in the third tier. Let's talk about them.
Yeah, so we got two here in the third tier. We got Will Levis or Levis, I still don't even know, but and Hendon Hooker.
Hold on, real
So
quick. That's how you know you're a football guy that doesn't listen to like all the bullshit shows because you don't even know how to pronounce his last name. You're just grinding film. You're looking at the
I'm
stats.
just
I love
grinding.
it. You're not falling into like the echo chamber.
Yeah, and what's funny too is even on like broadcasts, like when I watch film and stuff, I heard some people say Levi, some people say Levis. Like
Yeah,
we'll never know.
we'll call him
Kamara,
Levi.
we'll never know.
Yeah, we'll call him
We'll call
Levi.
him Levi.
Yeah,
Levi, I like the jeans. I like that.
yeah.
So we got those two guys in this tier. Both kind of guys who they're probably not going to get any starts this year. There's a chance that Levi could, but at the same time, it's just kind of like Malik Willis from last year. He could easily get replaced. With Levi specifically, he could easily get replaced next year. So the Titans end up getting a top 5 pick. Of course, they're going to take, let's say Caleb Williams on their radar. Of course, they're going to pass on Will Levi and take Caleb Williams. But the interesting thing about these guys, they both have very high upside. So if Levi hits his upside as a passer, we've seen him do some great things with his arm. We know that, and honestly, he gets kind of more discredit than he deserves. I think people say he makes bad decisions. I don't think that's really a part of his game. I think he makes good decisions. It's just a matter of having the right kind of system around you. He's also a great runner. He's a freak athlete with Levi. So
Mhm.
it's just going to be about the opportunity, whether he gets that opportunity. And even if he does, the only receiver they really have right now is Traylon Burks. And we still don't know exactly how that picture is going to pan out. Derrick Henry's kind of getting to the point where he may not be there by the time Levi starts. So it's kind of a messy situation for him. Hendon Hooker, on the other hand, he's 25 years old already. He's coming off a torn ACL. He's got Jared Goff in front of him, who by any means he could jump Jared Goff as the starter, but it's going to take time. And by that time he might be ready, the Lions could be moving on. So these are guys who are replaceable. These are guys who have a ton of upside. And if they become starters, you're definitely going to want to roster them. But as of right now, it's sort of a toss-up. So I'm not willing to bet on any of these two.
Yeah, I feel that. And Will Levi Levis is sort of he kind of
Levi
reminds me
Levis.
of Daniel Jones. He kind of reminds me of Daniel Jones a little bit, where we saw Jones struggle his first few years, and then he got placed in the right system with Brian Dable, and he thrived last year in terms of fantasy production. So, we'll see if the Titans can build an offense around him, or at least build an offense that can contain his deficiencies and take advantage of his strengths. Because, like you said, dude, he's got insane physical talent. And it's just going to be a matter of whether or not he can put it together between the years. So we'll see. Hendon Hooker, for me personally, I'm not really targeting him just because of the age in dynasty drafts.
Yeah.
But look, dude, before the ACL, like he was viewed as a first round lock for sure.
Yeah.
And then the ACL happened, so there is a potential buy low opportunity, I think. Does the ACL scare you off a little bit, or are you factoring that in at all?
These days, with ACLs, I think they only scare me for a year, right? It's like the year after the ACL, then I'll be worried. But, when you look at it, the trajectory of his career, he may not have that time afforded, right? So we talk about the ACL, it scares me with him because let's say his only shot is next year and then he's in and out with other injuries and then the Lions move on. Like, in terms of his career, that's what scares me. And he's already, as you mentioned, 25 years old. It'll be 27 by the time he gets a real shot, and at that age, why not draft a 21-year-old rookie? So that's really, it's the replaceability that scares me with a guy like Hendon Hooker, and the ACL plays a huge part in that in this specific instance.
Gotcha. So just so we can sort of have a frame of reference around these guys in a super flex dynasty draft, Joe, where are you taking them in terms of round? Are they like mid-second round guys? Are they still first round guys because it's super flex, or what do you think with these two?
So definitely not first round guys.
Okay.
I think there's an argument for Levi to be a mid-second. And again, it depends on how deep the league is. We're talking 10 players or 8 players. He may end up being a third round or not drafted at all. I'm in a dynasty league. And he ended up not getting drafted. Not a super flex, but point being, in a super flex league, I could see Levi going early second in like a 12. And then Hooker, he seems like, again, like a guy you might take a shot on maybe in the third round. I'm not targeting him in the second round, definitely not the first round for all the aforementioned things. He could just end up being a waste of a pick.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so that's tier 3. Tier 2, I know we have 2 more guys in here, so let's talk about them real quick. Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. What's your take on Bryce Young coming into this first year as a starter in Carolina? Does he have the ability to become a reliable fantasy starter in year 1?
What I think was really interesting about this Carolina team is the amount of growing pains that I think they're going to have. I mean, if you just look at their offensive unit, quarterback, totally new positions. Running back, Miles Sanders leading the charge, new to this team. Wide receivers, the top 3 guys, Jonathan Mingo, Adam Thielen, DJ Chark, all new to this team. Tight end even, Hayden Hurst, new to this team. Like, they took guys from all different teams, merged them into one. A new head coach, like, there's going to be a lot of growing pains for this team. So I'm not too excited about what Bryce Young is going to do in year 1. I think he's a smart QB. I think he's going to have a safe year, right? It's going to be a year where we kind of come out of it and we're like, okay, he did some good things. He showed really good potential in this game. He showed really good potential in that game. He threw a couple more interceptions in this game than he should. But I think it's going to be a situation where, like, a year or 2 down the line, he starts to establish himself and becomes, one of the better quarterbacks in this league. But again, it's going to take time. There's going to be a lot of growing pains for this Carolina team. So that's why I have him in tier 2 and not tier 1, even being the first overall pick. I'm not worried about his height. I mean, Kyler Murray has had his moments for sure in the NFL. Baker Mayfield at times had his moments. And my comp to him, Russell Wilson, has clearly had his moments in the league as well. So not worried about the height. But yeah, for Bryce Young, I think the growing pains are going to come. So if you could wait through that, you might have a good quarterback in the making. But for this year, not too excited about him.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the growing pains, Joe, because I think expectations are starting to get a little too out of hand with the Panthers. And I know they're kind of like the sexy, trendy, like the Panthers, But, dude, whole new team, whole new offense. It's going to take them some time, whether it's 6 weeks or whether it's the whole year. They're not going to start clicking right away, probably. So I appreciate that you mentioned that for sure.
Yeah, and I like what you said about the 6 weeks too, because there's always a chance, like we see teams like you talked about Justin Fields before. It took
Mhm.
them however many weeks to realize, hey, if we just run the ball with this guy, like we're in a really good spot. Bryce Young can run too, which helps with his upside. That's not going to be his first notion, as opposed to guys like Lamar who would like run first. But he's a smart quarterback, so I think it could happen. And again, this defense for the Panthers has definitely showed promise in the last couple of years, and they've really just been lacking the offense to go with it. So if they figure things out in the middle of the year, there's a chance he turns it around, especially if guys like Mingo, who's a very raw player, if he can kind
Mhm.
of get into his grind. Think about Christian Watson from last year. Remember Christian Watson? He was a waiver wire pickup at week 9, and then he was like the number one wide receiver for how many weeks. So with a guy as raw as Jonathan Mingo, it kind of becomes a situation where if he starts to hit his stride the same time Bryce Young hits his stride, this offense could go to another level. But yeah,
Yeah, definitely super interesting to target them, that stack in particular, in your rookie drafts. If you can get Mingo and Young, that could be pretty exciting for
very
like the
exciting.
next 10 years. Okay, so CJ Stroud, the other quarterback here in tier two for you, Joe. Do you think he has more potential to produce here in year one, or do you think he has less potential to produce in year one compared to Bryce Young?
I would say less just because of the position of what his receivers are. Like, I think they're going to have to heavily rely on Dalton Schultz, which is probably why they paid him so much money. They'll have him kind of as their wide receiver one. You got guys like John Mechie who are like coming into their first official year. You got Tank Dell, who they like a lot. You got Robert Woods, a veteran who I assume is not going to do all that much. You got Nico Collins kind of growing into his own. There's just a lot of figuring out to do with these weapons and a lot of testing and experimenting. Who's going to get open? Who's going to establish himself as the number one wide receiver? Who's going to establish themselves as a viable weapon for this offense? And doing all of that with a rookie quarterback, a defensive minded head coach. Yeah, I just don't think there's a lot of opportunity for CJ Stroud in year one to kind of be a viable fantasy player and dynasty. I think he's got a lot of upside. Let's say my dream scenario for CJ Stroud is that he gets Marvin Harrison Jr.
Huh.
next year. Woo! And then you kind of look at the situation. It's like I always think of it like pairing Josh Allen with Stephon Diggs. You give Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown. It's like get these quarterbacks great wide receivers and watch what they can do. So I think this is going to be a year one where we're like, oh, CJ Stroud really the guy. Like he's thrown a lot. He's thrown 5 picks this game. Next week he gets a long touchdown to Tank Dell, and then the following week he throws 5 picks again. Starting to wonder if they made the right choice, but give him the right weapons, give him some time. I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, it could either be he could either turn into Zach Wilson or he could turn to Trevor Lawrence from that draft class, right? Because both those guys had some growing pains in year one. One figured them out, the other one hasn't yet. So definitely something to keep an eye on. Okay, last guy. I think we all know who it is at this point. Tier one.
Yeah.
Tell me why Anthony Richardson is in his own tier above those other two really good quarterback prospects in Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. Why does Anthony Richardson set himself apart for you?
So I think out of the three of them, he fell into the best situation. For one, I mean, he's got an offensive minded head coach with Steichen. At the same time, he's got Michael Pittman as a receiver. He's got Jonathan Taylor. He's got a rising star, and I'll say rising star on Jelani Woods at tight end. Um, Other weapons that they drafted there, Josh Downs, who I think is going to be a great
Hmm.
player for them. Alec Pierce. He's got guys around him who are already established and can help him in this offense. And that's not even mentioning his elite playmaking ability, his elite athleticism. I mean, this is going to be Lamar rookie season all over again. It's just a matter of is Anthony Richardson going to start game one? That's what it comes down to. Because if he is, I'm taking Anthony Richardson maybe in like the seventh, eighth round of redraft leagues.
Wow.
But in Dynasty, he's a first round pick in any format. I mean, there's an argument for him to be the number one overall pick in Superflex. I think you're still taking Bijan, but Anthony Richardson, definitely someone who I'm looking to get in all my Dynasty leagues. The use of his legs. I mean, he runs like Cam Newton. He's got speed like Lamar. It's he calls himself Cam Jackson, which is again the combination of those two. But yeah, I mean, just kind of we don't know what his arm is going to be, the accuracies, like that was his biggest issue, was accuracy issues. He's constantly misthrowing targets and overthrowing people. And sometimes I would watch film and I just see the receiver running, the ball's like all the way over there. I'm like, how did they even get that far away from him? But again, I think Steichen knows that. They watch film. They clearly know what they're getting. If I can see that, NFL scouts can definitely see that. So they're going to have something prepared for him. I think they're going to do a lot of trying to get him comfortable in the slot, a lot of screens, get him some running, get him comfortable. But I think what they're really lacking, though, for him and what's going to take him to that next level is an elite separator at wide receiver. Because I talked about those overthrows and underthrows, but if you can get someone who can separate like that, I think it's going to help him out a lot. Look at, again, like Stephon Diggs, what he did for Josh Allen, as I keep mentioning that. But yeah, I mean, it's hard not to like Anthony Richardson, especially with his rushing upside.
So basically what you're saying, Joe, is that every team next year should try and draft Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yes.
I love it.
I'm excited.
So any last thoughts on this quarterback class before we wrap things up here? Is, who are like you betting on? Who's your guy? Who are you most rooting for? Just kind of wrap things up here for us, Joe.
Sure. So again, I think my guy would have to be Anthony Richardson. I made a trade in one of my leagues to move up and get him in one draft. I've been mocking him to a ton of my teams during like my off season already. I do have concerns about accuracy, but I believe that was a concern for a lot of the other guys too. Like Josh Allen. I keep going back to Josh Allen, but I remember Josh Allen's accuracy in year one was awful. And that was like something that we thought could never be fixed, but he was able to fix it and become one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. So yeah, Anthony Richardson has all the upside of the world. He's going to be my ride or die in this class.
I love it, dude. Well, tell Joe, thanks so much for coming on, man. This was awesome. Tell everybody where they can follow you. I know you're big on Instagram. This is a huge deal for us to have you on the podcast. You're an awesome guy, first off, but then you're also an awesome analyst and one of the most well-respected minds on my Instagram timeline. So tell everybody where they can find you.
Appreciate the kind words. You can find me on Instagram at fantasy.football.analyst. Getting our off-season content in groove now, so you're going to see a lot more posts, a lot more breakdowns like I just did. But yeah, definitely go check that out.
Awesome, dude. Thanks, Joe, and thank you all for listening. This has been another episode of the Better Fantasy Football Show. We'll see you next time. Peace.